welcome everyone. This is the track session submitters webinar for the CHIME Fall Forum this year in November. So myself, Saad as the chair of the planning committee and Dustin as the vice chair, we're going to walk through a few of the things and specifics of what you should expect from the forum itself. The format, there's a few changes this year from last year. And then, of course, the track sessions and the compositions of the tracks themselves. And then Adele's going to finish off with some of the logistics, timelines, and then we'll take questions at the end. So the agenda is laid out like this. We're going to do a little bit of a brief intro for you to know who you should put your questions towards and who's involved, the eligibility and the themes around the sessions themselves. We do have a different structure, a governance structure this year than we've had in the past, and that's the work group. So we're going to talk about that as well. Go over the high-level timelines, what you should expect as you're submitting your proposals and the timelines around there, and then we'll take the questions from everybody on here. So next slide. Meet your chairs. I'm Saad. I'm a CIO at a health system in Maryland called Luminous Health. I'm the chair of the planning committee this year. With me, and I'm going to let him introduce himself, is Dustin, who is spending his birthday today with us on this webinar. Dustin, would you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure, Saad. Thanks. As Saad mentioned, Dustin Hufford, Senior Vice President, CIO at Cooper University Healthcare. We're based out of Camden, New Jersey, a large academic tertiary care center. And yes, it's my 40th birthday today, and I'm leaving directly after this to go have some fun. But happy to be with you guys today and go over this information. We got some exciting stuff for you.
Thank you. It's not often that one of the chair people spends their milestone birthday going over the submission webinar. So this is very special.
That's how much it means. That's how much it means to us. We want to make sure we got
exactly. We also, of course, we're backed by the CHIME teams. You guys know these folks. I think Keith's on here. Holly may or may not be, but Adele is, and Adele's been sort of focusing our efforts. Adele, if you want to do a little quick intro.
Yes, and Keith is heavily involved, always guiding the process, and this is such a collaborative event for us. It's very important, but it's your conference. Keith is the fearless leader that is making sure we keep the train on the rails, so to speak. Holly is someone who is going to manage logistics. So when it comes to number of rooms, how things are slated in the agenda, all that sort of stuff, AV needs, and that's going to be Holly. And then I'm your program lead. So if you have any questions, even if I don't have the answers to them, feed the fish. I'll work with whoever I need to get the answers back to you.
Thank you, Adele. All right, so venue and date. So a couple of quick things here. Some of you may have been to Phoenix before. Some of you may have been to this specific resort, but for those of you that have not, it's a beautiful resort that's about a 20-minute drive from the Phoenix airport. It's also about a 20-minute drive from downtown Phoenix, so very, very nicely located. The dates this year are November 9th through 12th, and the difference here from past years is the days of the week. So usually we've had the week itself, Monday through Thursday, Wednesday, and so on and so forth. This time we're backing into a weekend, and this is really just in true sort of dedication to the feedback we have received from our fellow CIO members and foundation members. Reason being, in the post-pandemic, if there is such a thing, world, in-person events are really, really meaningful for especially us, like the CIOs, because you get to network and actually get best practices from your colleagues, right? More often than not, it's very, very hard for us to completely disconnect. If there's a downtime, if there's a cyber attack, or if there's something else going on, you can't really say, I'm at a conference, I'll deal with it when I come back next week. And so what's at risk usually from Zoom meetings to Teams meetings to phone calls are the networking events, the places where you go shake a hand, grab a drink and actually have a conversation with your fellow CIO or your fellow vice president and your fellow leader and decision maker. This year, CHIME has listened. So what they have said is, we're going to start during the week, but we're going to back into the weekend. What this allows us to do is essentially have a cushion at that back end so we can travel over a weekend. We have at least a dedicated day or so where we know for a fact that it's not going to be a weekday and we're not going to get hammered on all fronts. It is a bit of an experiment. So I'm sure there's folks out there that say, you know what, I'd rather have had the entire work week so I go home and I can do my laundry over the weekend. So there's going to be a few pros and cons there, but that's the thinking. Registration is not yet active. So if you go to the Fall Forum site and if you Google, you'll notice that it says there that your registration is going to be active, but the URL hasn't been posted yet. That's on purpose. So that will be active here very, very soon. Adele, did I miss any kind of logistics on the venue and date?
No, I think you nailed it very nicely.
Awesome. So next slide. So I know that we're here to talk about that third box, the track session and how the submissions are going to happen. But I would be remiss if I didn't at least give you all that are logged in today an overview of how the structure has changed. This is different from last year Fall Forums and the Fall Forums before that. So we used to have committees and subcommittees. We have simplified that a little bit this year. So there really is only one committee, and that's the Fall Forum Planning Committee. And you met us a little bit ago. So I introduced myself as the chair, Dustin's the vice chair, and we have a robust and strong team of CHIME underneath it. That is your Forum Planning Committee. Then we have 2 work groups, and that's it. Those 2 work groups essentially run the gamut for every kind of programming that is done for the Fall Forum. The first category, which is not what this webinar is about, but you should know about it because you're going to be submitting some other things for this third category, is the Keynote and Leadership Expeditions Work Group. So in the past, we've had something called Leadership from the Edge. And of course, we've had keynotes, and those have been 2 separate items. We have connected them and changed the second one a little. So keynotes, of course, we all know what those are. Leadership Expeditions is essentially a hybrid, if you could imagine a scale between a keynote and a track session. In that, these are industry experts. They might be our colleagues. They're very, very focused on specific items, and they may be items that we want other CHIME members to hear about, or we're getting feedback from the CHIME membership to say, I want to hear more about this. So the trick with this is both of these things are by invite only, which is why we're not having a submissions webinar for this. And so what this means is that the work group that raise their hands, that are on the folks that are on the work group themselves, they are actually going to be pushing out invites for both of these categories. There's a very, very well thought out process for the keynote side. Leadership Expeditions being a little bit of a different animal this year, will still have an invite only component to it. And the work group folks will actually come up with what that looks like. So more to come on that as in general for the folks that are going to be attending. And the third thing that we're going to go deep in on this webinar right now is the tracks work group. A couple of things to highlight here. These the people that man this work group, so the folks that are on the work group themselves, these are provider members only. So we have foundation members, right? And the foundation members essentially help us put stuff together, and they have representation on that work group for keynotes and leadership expeditions. Tracks work group that decides the tracks is only provider members. There is a level of opening of the submissions and then a review of submissions. So there's milestones, not just for you guys that are submitting the proposals, but there's milestones and a timeline for the folks on this work group, because they're the ones that are going to have to review this. And we're going to tell you in a completely transparent way how they're going to review it and the rubric they're going to use. And then last but not least, it's going to be their oversight and guidance that we're going to go through to say, okay, this is the way certain sessions that are reviewed and approved are going to be tagged, because we're going to have themes this year, and Dustin's going to talk about that in a second. So I'll stop talking now and hand over to the real brains of the operation here and the birthday boy himself, Dustin.
Thanks, Todd. Well, you stole a little bit of my thunder on this one, but we'll go with it. So as I mentioned with Leaders Expeditions, and we're really just calling it here that we're making a change from last year, and we're broadening the horizon of who we could invite for these sessions. So we're really looking at just getting some mission critical topics, as it mentions here. And previously we would have maybe invited CHIME members or CHIME Foundation members, but we're opening that up more. Again, invitation only, designated by the committee, but we might go to a group of payers, for instance, to talk about some of the major industry changes in the payer markets. It's kind of a capstone for the day. It's kind of something, to bring it all together at the end of the day. But yeah, so we just want to call that out as part of this, just so you guys don't think this went away and that you don't have a part in it. We'll make sure we have some good programming content there based on what's going on in the market today. So if we go to the next slide. All right, so track sessions, let's dig into this a little bit. So November 10th through 11th at CHIME, we'll have 16 session slots and broken down into 7 categories that I'll go over in a little bit. But the gist of it is it's a 45-minute length slot that includes 10 minutes of kind of question and answer at the end. We want to make sure we give our members time to ask any questions they might have in these track sessions. We are anticipating about 100 submissions. That's kind of the average over the last couple of years. And the track work group will work to narrow that down into the slots that we have available. So as it mentions, it's always a tough choice to go down through 100 submissions and get it down to only 16, right? But we'll have some really smart people looking at this, trying to figure out what content really matches with what's going on in the world. And we'll make sure that we don't duplicate sessions, right? With that limited number of slots that we have, we'll have themes, but we won't have multiple sessions under a theme that are very similar. We're going to make sure that we have varied content that's interesting to both our CHIME members and CHIME Foundation members. So next slide. All right, here's our essentials. This is what you guys got to pay attention to if you want to submit something, right? So the first key thing that's not listed on here, but it's very important, is that you actually have to log into the CHIME website before you start this process. It's not going to let you do any of this until you're logged in. But we just have some guidance here. We want to have you guys take note of, which is a killer title always helps. It's going to catch the attention of the folks who are reviewing the sessions right out of the gate. A good session description that sounds engaging, unique. Don't write 300 paragraphs. Write it into a paragraph that someone would read it and say, "Wow, I really want to understand what that person's trying to say." You want to make sure you have learning objectives, kind of call it out in bullet points. Something measurable is always good, right? You want to make sure that people understand what are they trying to improve within their organization or in healthcare in general. Metrics, we got to be data driven, right? So we want to, if you have any of that, you want to make sure you get that in there so people understand what they're going to try to improve with your talk. We want you to talk about an audience engagement. So how do you incorporate a learner-centric experience into your presentation? Areas of focus. What is it that you're going to talk about? Narrow down again as much as you can into language that anyone could understand. You never know who's going to be reviewing your proposal, so everyone's got to be able to understand it, right? And of course, CHIME member inclusion. So we'll talk about that a little bit in the next slide here. But one thing I want to call it is that Adele mentioned earlier that she's going to actually post a framework that you could fill out on maybe a Word document before you actually go into the site to submit it, just so you have your thoughts organized, and a little guide on how to do that. So we'll have that up on the website pretty soon here as an accompaniment to the actual registration process. Next slide. All right, let's talk about eligibility. So who is eligible to do all this? As usual, if we're talking about track sessions, we're talking about CHIME provider members and foundation partners. And we want to call out this table here because there are specifics for both CHIME members and CHIME Foundation members around both how many proposals you can submit and then the requirement to have another CHIME member. So if you're a CHIME member yourself, you can submit up to 4 proposals. You can speak yourself, and you're not required to invite another CHIME member. That could be just you. But if you're a CHIME Foundation member, we want to make sure that you're inviting a CHIME member to present with you on the topic. And there's limitations based on your CHIME Foundation level as to how many proposals you can actually submit. So you'll see Premier up to 3, Standard up to 2, and then Associate up to 1. And again, all 3 of them require you to invite a CHIME member, but you of course could have somebody from your organization speak with that CHIME member. All right, next slide. So here's a change. We worked on this over the last couple of months here, trying to come up with a way to communicate tracks that was as simplistic as possible, trying to convey what we want to achieve, right? So you'll see the themes up here. I won't read it all, but making things better with what you have, right? So we're talking about optimization and immediate gains your organization would gain from that session. Call out proven innovation. So when we're talking about proven innovations, you might be ahead of the pack on certain things and the cutting edge, but you already have data and metrics to show that it's successful and that you're going to scale that innovation into the future, as opposed to reimagining the future in the bottom, where we're talking about things that we want to solve and we have ideas to solve, but we might not have gotten there yet. So pay attention to these, because these are actually a drop-down box that when you submit, you want to make sure that you choose what you think you're most closely associated with in terms of your proposal. And we'll do some background work as well, just to make sure that we agree that that's the right track for that to be in. The goal is to have at least one session under each one of these. There might be multiple under some of them, but some of these might only have one session. Again, we only have 16 to go with. So it's not going to be like making things better with what you have today is going to have 15, right? So anyway, I hope you guys like the layout here. We'll have these examples posted on the website in a tab that you can read both what's on here today, and there's a little bit more detail explaining what we mean by each of these categories. All right, so Adele, I think I'm handing it over to you to take us to the end, talking about the work groups.
Yes, so we started at the 100,000, we've gotten down to the 30,000, and now we're going to kind of get a little further into the weeds with how the work group is actually going to run. So we have open submissions. The website is live. You can actually submit, and as Dustin said, please make sure you're logged in. And the reason for that is we're only taking submissions for tracks from, you have to have some type of membership, whether that's as a foundation firm or whether that's as an actual provider member. You have to be logged in order to submit. So that's step number one. And I should have probably put a bullet point on here for that. Submissions, this is different from Vive. So with Vive, and just bear this in mind as well, when we have our 2024 call for speakers on Vive, we begin programming the moment we open the call for speakers. And that programming of those track sessions is done both through submissions as well as invitation. As could happen with this, we may see that there's a gap in submissions, and we may actually invite somebody to actually come and speak where we know something's going on. But regardless, we're not going to start the process of reviewing submissions and programming track content until the submission date passes for Fall Forum. And that date is midnight Eastern time on May 7th. I think that's a Sunday. So all submissions will have multiple eyes on them. We think last year, Sod, correct, keep me honest on this, at least 2, but we really worked to have 3 people review each and every proposal. It's a pretty heavy lift for the work group, because if you think about, we're trying to get an agenda out by June 30th. We don't even start our work till May 8th. If we have 100 submissions, it's a lot of work. So these volunteers that are stepping up are really committed to this process and to this program. The other thing I want to make sure that you're looking at is the rubric. We do score every single proposal. That's part of the review process. It's not the only factor in selection and programming, but it is a big component to add some objectivity to the submissions. There are 5 measures that the rubric covers. And I would encourage you, since we're not even going to start programming until after the close of the call for speaker time, I would encourage you to take your submission and review it against that rubric. The rubric is available on a tab on the call for proposals landing page. You can access it, you can see it. And one of the big areas that we have in there, you'll get a score up to 50, which I'll talk about in a second. but one of the big areas is DE&I. CHIME is very committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And along those lines, that needs to be reflected in any type of speaker proposals that has 3 or more people. So we consider it a panel, even if it's a moderator plus 2 speakers. That means you have to have at least 1 female if you've got 3 or more, and or a person of an underrepresented group. So like people of color, LGBTQ, something else to give that diverse perspective. So the rubric is very, very important in getting your score. The other thing that's very critical when you do your submission, because this is for the CHIME team primarily, is who is the primary point of contact. We really take it very seriously that when you submit something, you're making a commitment to speak at this program. And we put the responsibility of coordinating with all members of that submission, all speaker members, on that point of contact. So if we need to communicate something to the speakers, we're going to use that primary point of contact. We do have a place on the application for a secondary point of contact as well, but be aware that it is your responsibility to bring those speakers together.
Hey, Del, we got one question already that I'll call it here.
Okay.
There's a question, have the keynote and leadership expedition sessions already been decided, reached out to? And that's a no.
Absolutely not. Yeah.
No, we
You
just
go
started
ahead,
that
Dustin.
process. Yeah, we just started that process. That committee is just having their kickoff call soon. And they've got a lot of work to do to come up with proposed topics and speakers. So it'll take a few months to get through that process as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think that work group kicks off next Friday. That's when we actually start that process. So good question. So the track rubric, again, this is available on the website for the call for proposals. It is scored across, I think I've said all this, 5 measures and DE&I. The DE&I factor is not really a measure because they can rate how you score on each measure on a scale of 0, you get no points, to 10, you knocked it out of the park. So you're eligible for up to 50 points. If, however, you do not have at least 1 female and you've got a speaker format that is 3 or more speakers, you can get dinged up to 10 points on your final score. Now, this is not the only way that we evaluate and program tracks, because we could end up with 25 submissions on AI. We're not going to program 16 AI sessions, right? So it's balance. It's looking at, we don't want conference by sod, where he's made 4 submissions and we accept all 4. So there are other factors that go into it on balancing topics and things like that, but this is a big one. So make sure you are looking at that rubric before you submit. So notification and post-selection, what will happen, our plan is right now, the target date for this work group to complete their work is June 19th. We're going to work hard to try to hit that date. And that's because we need the time leading up to June 30th, which is when we really want to have our agenda put together to notify that you've either been accepted or declined. Now, if you submitted last year, you also saw that you got your scores handed to you on each of the measures and what your total score was, so that you can take that feedback and use it for improvement in the future. So that was the whole reason the rubric was introduced. Again, I've already talked about the point of contact notifies all speakers. That's the person that's primarily responsible for communication downstream. And then if you become a selected session for the track, we will actually have 1 to 2 30-minute calls with you just for prep. There will be an onboarding to make sure we've got everybody's name right, bios, headshots, that sort of thing, understand your AV needs so that we can be fully prepared when we launch the program. And then I think the last thing that we, not the last thing, second to the last thing, is just some helpful tips. We've already talked about point of contact. The CIO provider members, our members want to hear from their own. So in the vein of storytelling and that sort of thing, you have to have at least one, unless you are a CIO member submitting. But that doesn't mean you have to stop at one. You could have multiple CIO provider members. That is a good thing if you do have multiple members on a panel, like as an example. Proof your submission. Make sure that your grammar and spelling and your objectives have action words and action statements, and then be innovative. So like in some of the drop-down boxes on format, panel is one of the format. Well, you may say, well, I want to do a fishbowl, or I want to do, some other type of engaging format. It is wide open. So if you come up with a cool, innovative way to do it, it doesn't have to fit in one of those categories. You can check other. So that is very much encouraged. And then the last slide I have is the timeline. So as you can see from this, the work groups are formed. The submitters webinar is today. So you can see we're here at the top on April 7th. So our work begins, as I indicated, keynotes and leadership expeditions. First meeting starts next Friday. And I believe the Friday after that, the Tuesday after that, we've got the track work group starting. So their work starts, the track work group more so in May. Proposal deadline is midnight, May 7th, which is a Sunday. So while I said you don't have to rush to get it in, make sure it's in before the deadline. And then we start the review process right after that closes. We are the ones that finalize all the programming of the tracks, leadership expeditions, and keynotes. And then speaker work begins to get everybody prepped for showtime. And then we have our event from November 10th through the 12th. So I don't know, do we have any questions on that? I was trying to see, we do have.
No, we had one outstanding question from George, which is that can we distribute these slides that we went through so folks can?
Such a great question, and absolutely. So what will happen is we will email anybody who was registered, whether you were able to attend or not, a copy of these slides. This session has been recorded. We will post the recording out on the website so that it's available on demand. And honestly, Buddy, if you have any questions, you've got my contact information. Just, well, I think it's even on the next slide. So please, come on now. There we go. Reach out to me. Now, again, like I said, I may not have all the answers, but I sure will work hard to get them for you. So
yeah, I just wanted to mirror what Adele said. Thank you everybody for logging in. This will be available for your teams if you need to distribute the recording or the slides. And if you have any questions, get in touch with us. The end goal here is to make this a fantastic fall forum, and nothing survives a changing environment. So while we've shown you all the outlines and we've thought, and the CHIME team has this down to a science now, and so they have figured out every inch of what we need to do to get there successfully. If an unforeseen sort of thing happens where we're lacking certain sessions and whatnot, you are the community we will be calling upon to fill in those gaps. So we really, really appreciate from the get-go your participation in this entire forum planning process.